Welcome to another incredible true story that proves sometimes the underdog really does win. Today I'm sharing a tale of bureaucratic bullying, legal loopholes, and sweet, sweet justice that unfolded in the most unexpected way. Grab your favorite drink because this one's a roller coaster from start to finish. Picture this. You've just inherited your dream property, a beautiful piece of land with the perfect spot for your ideal cabin retreat. You've done everything by the book, followed every rule, and then suddenly, a power-hungry HOA appears out of nowhere trying to destroy your dreams. But what they didn't count on was that sometimes, justice has a way of prevailing in the most dramatic fashion possible. Let me introduce you to the key players in this unbelievable saga. First, we have Marcus Chen, a 34-year-old software engineer who had always dreamed of building his own cabin retreat. Marcus was the kind of guy who read every contract twice, researched every regulation, and never cut corners. His late grandmother had left him a gorgeous 5-acre plot of wooded land in Pine Valley, Oregon, a slice of paradise that had been in the family for 60 years. Then there's Patricia Thornfield, the 58-year-old HOA president who ruled the nearby Sunset Ridge development with an iron fist. Patricia was known throughout the county for her perfectionist tendencies and her ability to find violations where none existed. She wore her authority like armor and treated every HOA meeting like a military tribunal. Her perfectly manicured nails had pointed at more violation notices than anyone cared to count. We also have Sheriff Deputy Jake Morrison, a fair-minded 42-year-old who'd been serving Pine Valley for 15 years. Jake had seen his share of HOA disputes, but he prided himself on knowing the law inside and out. He was the kind of officer who believed in justice over politics, facts over feelings. Finally, there's Elena Rodriguez, a sharp-witted property law attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. Elena had built her career defending property owners against overreaching associations, and she had an almost supernatural ability to spot legal loopholes and bureaucratic overreach. Marcus had spent months planning his dream cabin. After inheriting his grandmother's land in 2023, he'd meticulously researched every requirement, obtained every permit, and hired the best contractors he could afford. The land was perfect, nestled among towering Douglas firs, with a crystal-clear creek running along the eastern boundary. His grandmother's old cottage had been demolished years ago, leaving him with a clean slate to build exactly what he'd always envisioned. The property sat on Woodland Drive, a quiet country road that dead-ended at the National Forest. For decades, it had been a peaceful stretch of independent properties, each owner minding their own business on their generous lots. Marcus had even befriended his closest neighbors, the elderly Johnsons, who lived a quarter-mile away and had known his grandmother well. In spring of 2024, Marcus broke ground on his modest but beautiful 1,200-square-foot cabin. He'd chosen a design that complemented the natural landscape: cedar siding, a metal roof that would age gracefully, and large windows to take advantage of the forest views. Every aspect of the construction had been approved by the county, from the septic system to the well placement to the electrical connections. The first few months of construction went smoothly. Marcus would drive out from Portland every weekend to check on progress, often camping on the property in his RV. He loved watching his dream take shape board by board. The foundation was solid, the framing was precise, and by late summer, the cabin was really starting to look like home. But Marcus wasn't aware that changes were brewing in the neighborhood. Just 2 miles away, a new development called Sunset Ridge had been completed. This upscale community of McMansions came with its own HOA, one that was apparently looking to expand its influence beyond its own borders. The first sign of trouble came on a crisp October morning. Marcus arrived at his property to find a bright orange notice stapled to a tree near his driveway. The notice, printed on official-looking letterhead from the Sunset Ridge Property Management Authority, claimed that his construction was in violation of community standards and demanded immediate cessation of all building activities. Marcus stared at the notice in bewilderment. His property wasn't part of any HOA. He'd checked that thoroughly before starting construction. He'd specifically chosen this land partly because it was free from such restrictions. The notice cited various architectural guidelines, setback requirements, and approval processes that Marcus had never heard of. Confused but not panicked, Marcus called the number on the notice. A stern voice answered, "Sunset Ridge HOA, Patricia speaking." Hi, I received a notice about my property on Woodland Drive, but I think there's been a mistake. My land isn't part of any HOA. Patricia's voice took on a condescending tone. Mr. Chen, I presume? Let me educate you about something. When Sunset Ridge was established, we negotiated with the county to extend our architectural oversight to all properties within a 2-mile radius of our development. This is to protect property values and maintain community standards. Marcus felt his stomach drop. But I was never notified of this. I've owned this land for over a year. Ignorance of the law is no excuse, Mr. Chen. You have 48 hours to halt construction and submit your plans for approval. Any continuation of work without HOA approval will result in legal action. The phone went dead, leaving Marcus staring at his half-finished dream home. He spent the rest of the weekend researching frantically, scouring county records and HOA documents. Nothing he found supported Patricia's claims, but the legal language was confusing enough that he couldn't be completely certain. Monday morning, Marcus called the county planning office. The clerk he spoke with had never heard of any such arrangement with the Sunset Ridge HOA. In fact, she confirmed that Marcus's property was in an unincorporated area with no HOA restrictions whatsoever. Armed with this information, Marcus called Patricia back. I spoke with the county, and they confirmed my property isn't subject to any HOA oversight. Patricia's laugh was cold. The county clerks don't understand the more complex legal arrangements we have in place. I'm trying to save you from an expensive legal battle, Mr. Chen. Submit your plans for approval, or face the consequences. When Marcus refused, Patricia's tone turned threatening. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I've shut down bigger projects than your little cabin. This is your final warning. True to her word, Patricia launched an immediate campaign to stop Marcus's construction. She filed complaints with every county department she could think of: building and safety, environmental health, code enforcement, even the fire marshal. Each complaint was carefully crafted to sound legitimate while being completely baseless. Marcus found himself drowning in bureaucratic red tape. Inspectors showed up unannounced, forcing his contractors to stop work while they investigated complaints about improper septic placement and unauthorized tree removal. Each inspection found no violations, but the delays were costly and frustrating. Patricia also organized a letter-writing campaign, convincing several Sunset Ridge residents to file complaints about Marcus's unsightly construction and its negative impact on property values. Never mind that none of these residents could actually see Marcus's property from their homes. Patricia had convinced them that property values throughout the area were at risk. The harassment escalated when Patricia started showing up at the construction site personally. She would arrive with a clipboard and camera, taking photos of every aspect of the work and loudly pointing out what she considered violations. She once spent an entire afternoon measuring the distance between Marcus's cabin and the property line, claiming his setbacks were insufficient despite the county having already approved the placement. Marcus's contractors began to get nervous. They'd worked on plenty of projects with HOA oversight, but they'd never encountered anything like Patricia's aggressive campaign. The constant interruptions and threats of legal action were making everyone uncomfortable. The breaking point came when Patricia convinced 2 other HOA board members to join her in filing an actual lawsuit against Marcus. The suit claimed that his construction violated multiple covenants and restrictions, and sought both monetary damages and an injunction to halt all work on the property. Marcus realized he needed professional help. That's when he contacted Elena Rodriguez, the property law attorney who would become his secret weapon in the battle ahead. Elena Rodriguez had seen plenty of HOA overreach in her career, but Patricia's campaign against Marcus was particularly egregious. After reviewing all the documents and conducting her own research, Elena was confident that the HOA had absolutely no legal authority over Marcus's property. This is a slam-dunk case, Elena told Marcus during their first meeting. But Patricia Thornfield doesn't seem like the type to back down quietly. She's betting that you'll give in rather than fight a prolonged legal battle. Elena's plan was multifaceted. First, she would file a countersuit against the HOA, seeking damages for harassment and interference with Marcus's property rights. Second, she would request a temporary restraining order against Patricia and the HOA, preventing them from further interfering with the construction. But Elena had a more devious strategy in mind as well. Her research had uncovered some interesting information about the Sunset Ridge development itself. It seemed that Patricia's HOA might have some compliance issues of their own. "The best defense is a good offense," Elena explained. "While we're fighting their baseless claims, I'm going to dig into their own operations. HOAs that aggressive usually have skeletons in their closets." Elena's investigation revealed that the Sunset Ridge HOA had been operating for 2 years without properly filing their corporate paperwork with the state. They'd also failed to conduct required financial audits and had been collecting fees without proper authorization from their own residents. But Elena's most damning discovery was that Patricia had been using HOA funds for personal expenses, including her own legal fees in cases that weren't related to HOA business. This wasn't just civil misconduct. It was potentially criminal embezzlement. Meanwhile, Marcus's construction had ground to a halt under the weight of Patricia's harassment. His contractors were afraid to continue work with the threat of lawsuits hanging over their heads. Marcus was burning through his savings on legal fees while his dream cabin sat half-finished. Elena advised patience. "We're building a case that's going to completely destroy their credibility. When we spring this trap, it's going to be decisive." The legal maneuvering continued for months. Patricia's lawyers filed motion after motion, each one more frivolous than the last. They claimed Marcus's cabin violated setback requirements. It didn't. That his septic system was improperly placed. It wasn't. And that his construction was creating environmental damage. County inspectors found no evidence of this. Each false claim required time and money to refute, but Elena was methodically building a paper trail that would prove the HOA's harassment campaign. She was also quietly gathering evidence of Patricia's financial misconduct, obtaining bank records and interviewing disgruntled HOA residents who had begun to question their president's leadership. The showdown came on a gray November morning when Patricia decided to take her campaign to the next level. She had convinced herself that legal action wasn't moving fast enough, so she decided on more direct intervention. Marcus arrived at his property to find Patricia, 2 other HOA board members, and a private security guard blocking his driveway. They had set up folding chairs and a card table with a banner reading, "Stop Illegal Construction." "You're not entering this property until your plans are approved by the proper authorities," Patricia announced, her voice carrying across the quiet forest. Marcus remained calm, though his heart was pounding. "Patricia, you have no legal right to block access to my property. I'm asking you to move." "We have every right to prevent illegal activity," Patricia replied. "This construction stops today." The security guard, a nervous-looking young man who clearly didn't want to be there, shifted uncomfortably. Marcus could tell the guard wasn't sure about the legality of the situation either. Marcus pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the sheriff's department." "Go ahead," Patricia sneered. "They'll back us up once they understand the situation." What Patricia didn't know was that Deputy Jake Morrison had been following the case with interest. Elena had made sure to keep law enforcement informed about the harassment campaign, and Jake had done his own research into the legal issues involved. When Jake arrived 20 minutes later, he surveyed the scene with professional calm. Patricia immediately launched into her prepared speech about community standards and legal authority, waving a thick folder of documents as evidence of her claims. Jake listened patiently, then asked to see the specific legal documents that gave the HOA authority over Marcus's property. Patricia confidently handed over her folder, expecting immediate validation. Jake spent several minutes reviewing the documents while everyone waited in tense silence. Finally, he looked up with a slight frown. "Ma'am, I don't see anything here that gives your HOA jurisdiction over Mr. Chen's property. These documents all refer to the Sunset Ridge development, which is 2 miles away." Patricia's confidence began to waver. "Officer, you don't understand the complex legal arrangements we have with the county. This property falls under our architectural review authority." Jake shook his head. "I've checked with the county, ma'am. Mr. Chen's property is not subject to any HOA restrictions. You're currently trespassing on private property and interfering with lawful construction activities." The color drained from Patricia's face. There must be some mistake. "We have legal authority." "Ma'am, I need you and your associates to leave this property immediately. If you refuse, I'll have to arrest you for trespassing." Patricia looked around desperately, as if expecting someone to come to her rescue. The security guard was already packing up the folding chairs, clearly eager to leave. The other HOA board members looked mortified. "This isn't over," Patricia muttered as she gathered her documents. But Jake wasn't finished. "Actually, ma'am, it might be. Mr. Chin, do you want to press charges for trespassing and harassment?" Marcus looked at Patricia, who suddenly looked much smaller and less intimidating than she had moments before. Part of him wanted to end this nightmare once and for all, but another part of him just wanted to get back to building his cabin. "I just want to be left alone to build my home," Marcus said quietly. Jake nodded and turned back to Patricia. "Consider this your official warning. Any further interference with Mr. Chen's property will result in arrest. Is that understood?" Patricia nodded stiffly and stalked toward her car, leaving Marcus standing in his driveway with a sense of vindication he hadn't felt in months. But Patricia's humiliation at the hands of Deputy Morrison wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of her downfall. Elena Rodriguez had been waiting for the perfect moment to reveal what she'd discovered about the HOA's financial irregularities, and Patricia's illegal blockade had provided exactly the opening she needed. The day after the confrontation, Elena filed a comprehensive complaint with the State Attorney General's office, detailing Patricia's misuse of HOA funds. The complaint included bank records showing that Patricia had used association money to pay for her personal legal fees, home improvements that weren't HOA-related, and even a vacation to Hawaii that she'd classified as research for community improvements. Elena also revealed that Patricia had been collecting HOA fees from residents without proper authorization, violating state laws governing homeowner associations. The financial audit that Elena had commissioned showed that over $50,000 in HOA funds were unaccounted for. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. Elena's investigation had uncovered that Patricia didn't actually live in the Sunset Ridge development. She lived in a rental property 3 miles away and had never been eligible to serve on the HOA board in the first place. This meant that every decision Patricia had made as HOA president, every fine she'd imposed, and every legal action she'd authorized had been completely invalid. The entire Sunset Ridge HOA had been operating under fraudulent leadership for over 2 years. When Elena released this information to the residents of Sunset Ridge, the reaction was explosive. Homeowners who had been intimidated by Patricia for years suddenly realized they'd been victims of an elaborate con game. Many of them had paid thousands of dollars in fines and assessments that had no legal basis whatsoever. A group of Sunset Ridge residents immediately filed a class action lawsuit against Patricia, seeking to recover the money she'd collected illegally. The State Attorney General's office launched a criminal investigation into her financial activities. Marcus watched these developments with amazement. What had started as Patricia's attempt to stop his cabin construction had evolved into the complete exposure of her fraudulent operations. The local newspaper picked up the story, and soon Patricia Thornfield became a cautionary tale throughout the county. Her picture appeared on the front page under the headline, "Fake HOA President Scams Homeowners Out of Thousands." The real Sunset Ridge HOA board, once they discovered Patricia's deception, immediately issued a public apology to Marcus and formally withdrew all claims against his property. They also voted to dissolve any pretense of authority over properties outside their development. With Patricia's harassment campaign finally ended, Marcus was able to complete his cabin construction in peace. The delays had pushed his timeline back by several months, but the final result was everything he'd dreamed of and more. The cabin was a masterpiece of craftsmanship and design. The cedar siding had already begun to weather to a beautiful silver gray, blending seamlessly with the surrounding forest. Large windows filled the interior with natural light, while a stone fireplace provided the perfect focal point for the living room. Marcus had decided to add a wraparound porch that hadn't been in his original plans, partly because he could, and partly as a celebration of his victory over the HOA's attempted overreach. The porch overlooked the creek and provided the perfect spot for morning coffee and evening reflection. The interior was everything Marcus had hoped for: an open-plan living area with exposed beams, a modern but cozy kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a loft space that he'd converted into a home office. Every detail reflected his personal taste, free from the architectural restrictions that Patricia had tried to impose. Deputy Jake Morrison stopped by during the final stages of construction, partly for a friendly visit and partly to ensure there were no further problems from the defunct HOA. He was impressed by Marcus's craftsmanship and attention to detail. "You know," Jake said as they sat on the new porch watching the sunset through the trees, "this whole situation could have been avoided if people just respected property rights and followed the law." Marcus nodded, still amazed at how quickly everything had changed once the truth came to light. "I never wanted a fight. I just wanted to build my cabin and live peacefully." Elena Rodriguez also visited the completed cabin, bringing a bottle of champagne to celebrate not just Marcus's victory, but the successful prosecution of Patricia's fraud case. The state had recovered most of the stolen HOA funds, and Patricia was facing serious criminal charges. "This is what happens when bullies meet the law," Elena said, raising her glass in a toast. "Justice doesn't always prevail quickly, but it usually prevails eventually." The Johnsons, Marcus's elderly neighbors, brought over a homemade pie and stories about his grandmother, who had apparently fought her own battles with overzealous bureaucrats over the decades. "She would be proud," Mrs. Johnson said with tears in her eyes. "You fought the good fight, just like she would have." The story of Marcus's battle with the fake HOA president spread throughout the region, becoming a cautionary tale about the importance of verifying authority and standing up to bullies. Patricia Thornfield eventually pleaded guilty to embezzlement and fraud charges, receiving a sentence of 2 years in prison and an order to make full restitution to her victims. The Sunset Ridge development elected a new legitimate HOA board that focused on actually serving their community rather than expanding their power over neighboring properties. They implemented strict oversight measures to prevent future abuse and established clear boundaries for their authority. Marcus became something of a local hero, invited to speak at property rights seminars and HOA reform meetings throughout the state. He always emphasized the same message: know your rights, verify claims of authority, and never be afraid to seek legal help when facing harassment. Deputy Jake Morrison used the case as a training example for other law enforcement officers, showing how important it is to research legal claims rather than simply accepting assertions of authority at face value. Elena Rodriguez saw her practice grow substantially as word spread about her successful defense of Marcus's property rights. She specialized even more heavily in HOA disputes and developed a reputation as someone who could take on even the most aggressive homeowner associations. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome was the simplest one. Marcus finally got to enjoy his dream cabin retreat. He spent weekends there throughout the year, finding peace in the forest setting his grandmother had preserved for him. The cabin became a sanctuary where he could escape the pressures of his software engineering career and reconnect with nature. The moral of Marcus's story extends far beyond a simple victory over an overzealous HOA president. It's a reminder that in our increasingly complex world, people and organizations sometimes claim authority they don't actually possess. Whether it's a fake HOA president, a scam caller pretending to be from the IRS, or any other person trying to intimidate others into compliance, the solution is always the same: verify their claims, know your rights, and seek help when needed. Marcus's case also demonstrates the importance of thorough research and professional legal help when facing harassment. Elena Rodriguez's methodical approach to building a defense case, combined with her willingness to investigate Patricia's own potential wrongdoing, turned what could have been a protracted legal battle into a decisive victory. The story shows that bullies often rely on their victims' reluctance to fight back. Patricia had probably succeeded in intimidating other property owners over the years, convincing them to comply with her illegitimate demands rather than challenge her authority. Marcus's decision to stand his ground, despite the stress and expense involved, ultimately protected not just his own rights but those of everyone Patricia had victimized. Finally, Marcus's experience illustrates the value of patience and persistence in the face of injustice. There were moments when giving in to Patricia's demands would have seemed easier than continuing the fight, but Marcus's determination to protect his property rights ultimately led to a complete vindication and the exposure of a much larger fraud. Today, Marcus Chen enjoys his beautiful cabin retreat in the forests of Pine Valley, Oregon. The creek still runs clear along his eastern boundary, the Douglas firs still tower over his roof, and the morning coffee still tastes better on his wraparound porch than anywhere else in the world. Most importantly, he enjoys all of this in complete peace, free from the harassment of fake authorities and illegitimate claims of power. And somewhere in the state prison system, Patricia Thornfield has plenty of time to reflect on what happens when the abuse of power meets the reality of justice. The HOA president who thought she could steamroll a quiet software engineer learned the hard way that sometimes the law really does prevail, especially when you're not actually following it yourself.